just leave my pronouns. Hello, everyone, and it is so great to be a part of the PanACEa Conference, PanACEa Conference today. My name is David J. I use he, him pronouns. I am joining you from Oakland, California in the United States, which is, as we are sometimes fond of saying over here, unceded Ohlone territory. And it is a real honor to be joining you all today. Thank you so much to Dr. Pragati Singh for inviting me to share some of the history of the ACE community, both the early days of the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, which is, or asexuality.org, which is a site that I started when I was 18, and some of the history of the word asexual, the ways that our communities been coming together that predate that time when, I think really between AVEN, asexuality.org, and the Haven for Human Amoeba, those were which was a site that predated it. Those were the two places where asexual people really began to find one another for the first time. This happened around 2001, 2002. And so I'll kind of talk about a history that sort of prehistory, pre-2001, and then a little bit about what happened in that time and what's happened since to help to bring the community together. But this will also kind of be a little bit of a dialogue. Dr. Singh, Pragati, how would you like me to refer to you?
Please call me Pragati, David. So this is a very, very warm welcome, first of all, to David, somebody that, of course, a lot of us in the community look up to, somebody who's inspiring us continuously since 2011, as far as I remember, and has taken leaps to make sure that asexuality is something that is not just talked about, but is more visible, more accurately represented, and so on and so forth. So, of course, as always, I feel like you can hear a lot of noise in my background. Is that right?
You're good.
Okay, so as always, it's a pleasure to be speaking with David again. And this time, I particularly wanted to talk about something that I'm really, really interested in understanding myself, something that I've been researching recently, something that I think adds a lot of perspective to our understanding and future activism as well. Once we understand our history, I think we can do our futures a little better. So what we're going to be talking about today for everybody, and of course, David already knows this, is where did this word come from? The word asexual. How was it devised? What made David choose this word? How was this word being used before AVEN? How were asexual concepts being described before this word was coined? What were the historical references made to this concept throughout the history of not just sexology, but the history of culture, traditions, society at large? And how do we see this in that larger context? So just to let everybody know that David has joined us very graciously at a very early morning hour, and is I'm hoping feeling not too tired and exhausted by this cruel demand we put out for him. But David, it's over to you. My first question then maybe perhaps can be, how did you come up with this term asexual? Why did you think it was the correct word to represent what you wanted to represent?
So I can share a little about what my life was, but I think I want to be very cautious about centering myself in this dialogue, because I think there are the circumstances by which I came across it, but there was a lot of mention of the word asexual before it was a word that I started using, and I want to make sure that we talk about that, and also make sure that when we think of me, when we talk about this moment of when I started using the word asexual, there were thousands of other people doing the same thing at the same time. I was sort of one of this generation of ace people who was struggling to understand my identity in isolation and inventing language to describe it in isolation. And the only reason that AVEN exists is that when I bought the domain name asexuality.org, and before I bought that domain name, there were thousands of people who were searching for that term on Google. And one of the real reasons why the community came together in 2001 at the time that it did is that Google was coming into widespread usage. And before Google, when you went and searched for the word asexual, you would find papers on bacteria and plant biology, which is why we had sites called things like the Haven for the Human Amoeba, because we were so used to just seeing that this term couldn't refer to people. and Google, their algorithm was the first time that we could really find one another. So I'll give that context. So when I started using the term asexual, I was probably 13 or 14, and I was in middle school in I don't know how this tracks with grades in India, but I was 7th grade in probably 8th grade in the United States, and in St. Louis. And I was really lucky because I went to this school where suddenly a lot of my friends started coming out. A lot of my friends started coming out as lesbian or bi. And so there was this discussion in a way that we sort of presumed that everyone was straight. In my school, suddenly there wasn't this presumption anymore. And people were asking the question of what sexual orientation they were. And around this time, I had for years been trying to understand how I fit in a world of sexual attraction. Like, I knew that I didn't quite have the word sexual attraction yet, but I knew that the people around me were all experiencing something that I wasn't experiencing. That they were talking about having crushes on people, they were talking about wanting to kiss people, and this was the kind of defining transition happening among all of my peers. And this is what adults were telling us we were going to be thinking about all the time. This is what my friends were thinking about all the time. And I wasn't experiencing it. I assumed that I was a late bloomer through, I'll use ages, when I was kind of, I don't know, 12 and 13. And then by the time I was 14 and been sitting waiting for several years, kind of already I'd already gotten really tall. Like all the other changes that already happened in my body. I remember having this realization that this waiting I was doing to experience this thing that everyone else was experiencing, maybe I should come up with a word for it. Maybe I should start thinking about the fact that I seem to be different. And that, combined with the fact that I had all of these people coming out as queer, led me to want to think about a word. And the word asexual as I think at first I said ansexual, sexual, because I want to distinguish from the amoeba. And then I switched to asexual, which was easier to say. But I wanted a way to kind of talk about what was maybe a sexual orientation for me. And it took me, I'd say, 4 years of struggling with it to decide that it wasn't a problem. I think at first, when I used the word asexual, I assumed that there was something wrong with me. I assumed that there was something broken. I didn't know how to distinguish sexuality and intimacy. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me and I just didn't want to connect with other people. I thought I was afraid I was going to be alone for my whole life. So it took me until I was probably 17 to get to a place where I really thought, oh, this doesn't have to be a bad thing. This could just be the way that I am. It could be a sexual orientation. So that's how the term came up for me. How I came to sit with it. It was really, I think, coming to an acceptance of it was really a struggle for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's obviously interesting, but also insightful in terms of how movements can be designed and started by people who have one idea of what needs to be done, and then of course it has to be joined by many other people. But that's an interesting point that you made about how you came to the term, thought of pansexual to distinguish it from the amoeba. But that brings me also to another point. We do have, and you've mentioned this before, the haven for the amoeba, which is in some ways a precursor to AVEN. It's a Yahoo group that still exists, as far as I know. What was your connection to that, or what are they doing now? Who is the one who started it, and where do we find them?
So I don't actually remember who started it. And if they were even active, I think they were active when I came back to it. So I'll move the timeline forward, and then I'll move the timeline back. So 17, I was finishing high school, and was becoming really active in social justice work, was learning a lot about social movements and how they started, and grappling a lot with my own queer identity. And so I went to college. I went to this undergrad, this school called Wesleyan in the United States, in Connecticut, which was sort of like the queerest school I could find. Like you visited, and there people were just like chalking radical queer slogans on the sidewalk. And I think the thing I was looking for in a university was a place to figure out asexuality, and a place to figure out and connect with, like, try to find other asexual people. Because St. Louis, it's a big city, but it's in the middle of the country. Like, it's not it's a little bit of a backwater in terms of queer culture. And I was like, okay, if I can go to the coast, I can go to this big university, I'm sure there'll be other asexual people there, and I can find them, and I can figure this out. And I got to the campus and started looking around and couldn't find anyone. And started looking at the library, and I think I found one book that mentioned asexuality, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And so it started really dawning on me that there wasn't a community out there. And so I created this website. I created a website at first on just, like, the university gave us a domain name. It was like djay.wesleyan.edu or something. And I created the first version of AVEN on that website because I knew how to write HTML, and started sending it around looking for other people like me. And that is when I, there's an important thing in between, which is that I had friends at Stanford. So my best friends from high school in St. Louis went to Stanford. I went to visit them on the Stanford campus. And when I was there, they told me about Google. Like, Google was just getting started. We just sort of graduated off of the Stanford campus. They're like, there's this new search engine. It's really good. You've got to try it. So I went back and I tried Googling the word asexual. And that was the first time I found evidence of other asexual people. I found this article called My Life as an Amoeba, which was just a description of someone being asexual, and was really blown away. It was really incredibly powerful, after years of just struggling with this idea of being alone, to see written there that someone else was feeling what I was feeling. And I couldn't read the whole article. It was this overwhelming experience. And so I made the website after that. I said, okay, now I know there are other people out there. I've seen one kind of blog post about it, and I would need to create a place for us to come together. So I created this website, mostly just like had a definition of the word asexual, and asked people to email me. And the definition I used was an asexual person is experienced to I think it originally was an asexual person's experience to neither men nor women, because I thought of, or to neither gender, because I thought homosexuality, same gender, heterosexuality, opposite gender, asexuality, neither gender, like that has a certain. And I emailed it around to a bunch of different queer groups to just try to see if there were asexual people out there. And someone helpfully emailed me back and said, you really should take the gender binary out there. You shouldn't imply that there are two genders in your definition. And I was like, oh, I'm from St. Louis. No one ever told me that we should be questioning that there are two genders, but that probably sounds like a good idea. So I took that out. And then started getting emails from people, like pretty rarely, I'd say, maybe one or two a month. But I started getting emails from people who were finding this website who were asexual. And that was also incredibly powerful, because there were these long emails. They were people who really felt alone, who really felt isolated, like I had. And so we would get on the phone and talk to one another. We would have these really sort of rich conversations about all of these experiences we had that no one else had been in our lives had been able to relate to. And it was that summer after I'd started AVEN. I started in March of the year 2001. In the summer of 2001, I got an email from someone who's part of the Haven of the Human Amoeba, which at that point had, I think, 18 people on it. And the Haven for the Human Amoeba had been started in the year 2000. So it was started about 6 months before I started AVEN. As a Yahoo group that was just a place for people to come together. And so for the next year, the sort of 2001 to 2002, more and more people kept coming onto the Haven for the Human Amoeba. And that was where we really started having some of the first discussions about what this term asexual was. And we were going and looking at that history, and a lot of the discussions we were having then were paralleled by discussions we have now. So we had some of the first discussion about romantic identity. Like, I'm aromantic, and so I had assumed that all asexual people were aromantic, because that was my experience. And so we had some of our first romantic people coming on, and we were trying to grapple with, what does that mean? We were grappling with questions of whether asexual people, like whether masturbation meant that you weren't asexual, whether there was a difference between sexual attraction and sexual arousal or sexual desire. We were, and I think one of the real central definitions we were grappling with, back to this definition of the term asexual, was how to control the word. So there were people in the forum. I remember there was someone who had this website called the Official Asexual Society. That was kind of competing with AVEN. And when you went to the Official Asexual Society, first of all, there were all these unicorns in the background. It was like, they had me beat in terms of style. But when you went to the Official Asexual Society, they had this quiz that you had to take. And it was like 20 questions, and you had to answer, I think you had to answer yes to all 20 questions, or you were not asexual. And they basically said, take this quiz, and if you answer yes to all these questions, email us, and then you can be part of the asexual community. And so they were arguing that this term really had to be policed, that if we weren't really strict about who got to identify as asexual, then we'd wind up with a lot of confusion out there in the world about what asexuality was, and that would hurt asexual people. And I really felt the opposite. I was in this university with a lot of queer culture. I was seeing these really vicious debates going on about who was and wasn't really a lesbian. And I really believed that this word asexual should be a tool and not a label. We shouldn't be defining it and then asking people to meet our definition. We should be saying, look, this language seems to be really useful. Like, it's really useful to me to help understand this world that just presumes that I'm going to be sexual, and that tells me that if I'm not sexual, I'm going to be alone forever. That those are assumptions that I need to be able to challenge in order to live my life and be happy. And at that point on asexuality.org, we were sort of like the people from the Haven for Humanity were trying to study to switch over because we just had a better software, and because we were more open and accepting. And what we were saying on AVEN was, if you this word is a tool and not a label. If the word asexual feels useful to you, pick it up and use it. Like, we're going to have this definition on the website, which is a person who does not experience sexual attraction. Now, a person who experiences little or no sexual attraction. We're going to have this definition on the website. If that definition feels right to you or feels resonant, use it. If it doesn't feel resonant, but you want to hang out in this community because there's something we're talking about that you want to figure out, great. Like, we're not going to require you to use this term to hang out in our community. We're here to help you to help people understand themselves in whatever language they want to use. And that was really a kind of radically different stance than a lot of other people in the community were taking. But I think it's a really important one, because that's what allowed us to talk about gray identity. That's what allowed us to talk about demisexual identity. That's what allowed us to talk about hetero, homo, pan, bi, and romantic identity and aromantic identity. Like, all of these other words came out of that sort of call on people to use the words that were right for them. So if we're talking about where the word asexual came from, I think that piece, the history, is really important.
So much of what you were saying, I find so relatable, David, because I don't know if you still closely follow the small communities, but when I started doing this, I came across so many people who had this concept of the gold star ace people, because their understanding was that to be a real asexual person, you can have never had any kind of sexual activity, and you must hate the idea of having sex, so on and so forth. And I came across that so often that at this point of time, I almost actively find it very, very hurtful when I see somebody talking about asexuality as somebody who has to be a virgin, or somebody who's celibate, or somebody who is never going to have sex or any kind of a relationship, all kinds of things. People have these ideas of asexuality being this very rigid term, and there's almost a sense of superiority in some people when it comes to the gold star ace people. And I wonder if that is somewhat related to what you're talking about, because I see a lot of overlap and a lot of parallel between what you said happened back then and what I can still see happening today in this day and age, unfortunately. But thank you for bringing that up, the entire story of how you coined the term and how you believe in using it as a tool and not as a fixed label that somebody has to feel they have to fit into and box themselves within. Very, very relatable. I personally loved this bit of the chat. Something that I wanted to also ask you about was, you mentioned about the historical references, some of them. And a lot of people here probably have read about the history of, sexuality, and must have encountered Kinsey's scale at some point or the other. And I know a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love the audience to know more about how you think there was a parallel between that and asexuality today.
Yeah, and I'll reference some research that was happening. This was talked about at a conference in New York in 2017, I want to say, maybe 2019, actually. So there was someone in our community who was doing a bunch of archival research, and they were looking for the earliest mentions of the word asexual in magazines and newspapers. And at least here in the United States, they found mentions that went back to like the 1890s, I think, and which is much earlier than Kinsey's research, which was in the 1950s, much earlier than the Storms model, which I'll talk about, which was the 1970s. Those were the first time that sort of scientists were talking about this. These were mentioned the word asexual around the time the word heterosexual was getting used for the first time. And mentions of the word asexual then were used they were almost used as a way of kind of illustrating inhumanity. So I think one of the first times it was used, and I can't remember the exact contents, but it's used next to the word monster, as a way to like describe a set of people that the article doesn't like. And then later on, around the time of the fights around women's suffrage, the term asexual starts getting used a lot to refer to suffragettes, and because these are women who are fighting for their rights, who therefore not like refusing to be sexualized. And so there's all of this discussion in the press about how these must be women who just don't like sex. And maybe there's this group, this population emerging of quote unquote asexual women who are just really angry and don't know how to be mothers and like don't know how to love people. And that must be why they want to vote. And there's even this piece that I think is really fascinating. It's almost like science fiction that sort of presumes that there's going to be these suffragettes are asexual women who are kind of like robots, and eventually they're going to chill out and they'll just be everyone else's servant. Like all the sexual people will keep having families and kids and being happy, and the like asexual suffragettes will just like not want or need anything, and so we'll do all the labor is what they're assuming. But there's this real way that the term asexual is used to dehumanize people. It's used to like, if you're asexual, you must not desire anything, you must not have any desires that are relevant, and so it kind of is used to objectify people. And to render whatever it is they want invalid through that. And we see this a lot in the way that asexual tropes have been racialized, in the way that like certain ethnic groups are talked about, in the way that even though in that case the word asexual wasn't being used, it came up again. In this archival research, it came up again in the 60s, when there was sort of this like free love, we're talking about every kind of sexuality. And then the word asexual was just sort of thrown into almost this like confetti of crazy terms, where it was like, maybe you really like to smoke reefer, maybe you like really like to have sex with dolphins, maybe you're asexual. Like it kind of appears in a mix like that. And then and that was around the time, so that's where the term is in popular culture. It's like appearing sparsely, and it's appearing to sort of mostly refer to inhumanity, or at least refer to something that is like out there and almost unimaginable. And at the same time, in the 50s, you have Kinsey's research happening at the University of Indiana. And this is one of the first real studies on human sexuality. And it's got flaws as a study, but Kinsey starts interviewing a bunch of people and doing a bunch of surveys on human sexuality. And he discovers things like the prevalence of homosexuality is a lot higher than anyone ever thought. But he also has a bunch of people who aren't sexual enough to be able to answer his surveys. And so he calls them the X's. And he basically just like takes them out. He's like, some percentage of people are X's. I want to say it's something crazy like 10%, which is way higher than any of the stats we have now on ACE identifying people. But he's like, a bunch of people are X's who just aren't sexual. We're not going to talk about them. we're going to talk about the sexuality because no one talked about it before, and that's what was interesting. But there's this implication in his research that people who aren't sexual exist, which isn't really talked about because everyone's too busy freaking out about the fact that he's talking about sexuality. And then in the 70s, they come out with a model of sexual orientation, which is a kind of two-dimensional graph, or two dimensions of attracted to men, attracted to women. And you get from that heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual, and then asexual. And I think it's attracted to same gender, attracted to opposite gender. So that's a gender binary model. But that's the first time that asexuality appears in academic work as, at that point, a mostly theoretical way that humans can exist. And the other place it appears, and this harkens back to sort of the description of feminists, is of suffragettes, is in this term Boston marriages. So around the teens and 20s, there were a lot of women who were starting to be able to work professionally. And so they would get roommates, and they would live with their roommates while they held down a job until they got married. And a bunch of women just didn't ever want to get married and leave their roommates. They liked being financially independent. And many of them were probably in queer relationships with their roommates. It was sort of implied, but women who stayed in this arrangement instead of sort of graduating out of it into marriage into like their late 20s were called, that was referred to as Boston marriage. And there was an implication that a lot of these were asexual relationships. So the one book that I found when I searched the word asexual in my campus library was called Boston Marriages, Intimate Asexual Relationships Between Women in the 20s. And it was talking about this phenomenon and sort of whether they were really like, whether those women were having sex or whether they weren't having sex, and what that meant about how to interpret their relationships, and sort of what it meant at the time as a rebellion against gender roles. So you have this term that's getting thrown around that is kind of slowly getting articulated in the scientific literature, but really as a hypothetical. And then you have very sparse, like, actual people identifying as asexual. I remember going into old Usenet groups, which is sort of like the early text-based internet, and finding all of these places where you'd have people just like pop onto a thread and say, hey, I think I'm asexual. Does anyone else identify that way? And no one else would. So there were people looking for one another, but they weren't connecting. At the same time, at kind of questions at conferences, I've since learned in the 90s around neurodiversity, you had people who were having panels on asexual identity, but it was just in these sort of locations and in these communities that people like me, most people in the world didn't have access to. And so all of that led to this idea that, when I was inventing the word in the mid-90s, when I was inventing the word for myself, there was this sense out there in the world, and I got this from the queer people in my life. There was this sense that in the abstract, asexual people existed, that there were some people out there who were asexual. They just lived alone for their entire life and they were happy that way. There was sort of this myth of kind of like a emotionally neutral, hypothetical asexual person that a lot of people felt like they maybe knew someone who was like that. But there was no real description of asexual experience, of asexual lived experience, of grappling with the expectations of sexuality, of understanding how to explore intimacy in all the different ways that we do without that in defiance of sexual scripts. Like all of that, none of that was there because there weren't people who identified as asexual finding one another. I'm hoping what I wound up answering was actually your question.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it is so insightful. I personally think it is extremely valuable to have historical reference points to be able to place any movement, like to be able to know what the starting point is, where it's going to go, the directions it's already taken, and where to go from there. And I wonder if you agree with that. And also, I personally feel like there's not enough written about the history or historical references mentioned about asexuality, even when inaccurately, even when next to monsters, even all of those things included. I think they still form some kind of a background to start working from. What do you think about that? And do you think there's a need to document all of this better and to put it out there somewhere?
I would love to see some more in-depth research into this, and I would love to see some in-depth research into kind of what does it mean? What is it meant to be without sexuality? There are books about celibacy, which I haven't mentioned here, but the very complex cultural history of people deciding not to have sex, which is interwoven, I think, with the history of the variation of sexual attraction and sexual desire. But I think that understanding that one of the things I take from that is that there is a historical tension. We see this in the way that asexuality shows up in popular culture. There's this historical tension between asexuality and people's definition of humanity. In those early days when I was doing visibility and education work, part of what was so powerful about it was that people didn't think that humans could be asexual. There was this sense that sexuality was a universal constant, and therefore, if you were asexual, you were inhuman in other ways. You were incapable of feeling love. You were incapable in a way that made you dangerous, or in a way that made you sort of robotic and controllable, in a way that rendered you less able to have agency. And so I think that it shows how we as a movement are challenging and expanding the definition of what it means to be human. And I think that is that's a really important thread to pull. I saw one question in chat about where is this headed, and I think that expanding so much of it, I'll say for me in my life, so much of my ACE journey has been around understanding human connection, understanding intimacy, and understanding how to expand the definition of what that can be. I think I've shared this with you, but I live right now, I co-parent a child with a married couple. And we have, not in a completely new way, but in a fairly new way, sort of been pushing the bounds of California family law to be able to exist as a family with 3 parents and 1 kid. And so as we expand what it means to connect, we're also expanding definitions of family. We're also expanding definitions of love and intimacy. I know of ACE people who are living in community in really powerful ways. And I think that work of saying like, oh, our the needs that we all share as humans can be met in new and powerful and creative ways. And as a community, part of our work is showing how that's possible. I think that is one piece that I take from this history.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in my experience, I feel like I've learned so much about human lives, about intimacy, about sociology, psychology, intimacy, all sorts of things, from just understanding the basic concepts of asexuality and also lived experiences. These are experiences that are rarely ever talked about. I know it for a fact that in India, most people who are asexual will not say that they're asexual, because there's a lot of stigma attached to it, even to date. But because I am privy to those experiences, I get to hear about them. I'm always tempted to let people know that there are other ways of forming a connection, of having a family, of having love in your life, of feeling fulfillment, and all of those things. But with the lack of representation, I feel like it's always going to be a struggle to let people know that they can have an okay life. There's a question, I think, in the chat that I'm going to take up from Mridula, I believe. It says, do you think that a wider knowledge of the history of asexuality will reduce the debates of gatekeeping that was discussed earlier, or is the question of the gold standard always going to be a part of the discourse?
I hope that some of the history can reduce, can help to reduce the gatekeeping, and I also am familiar with a lot of the with the tensions around the notion of gold star asexual, which I think of as also about ableism and transmisogyny, that a gold star asexual is one for whom there is not only are you are asexual, you are conventionally attractive, so people can't say that your asexuality is just you covering up that no one wants to be sexual with you, which is, I think, that's a crazy thing anyway, because people who aren't attractive wind up in great loving relationships with sexuality all the time. Like, it's not like, anyway. But people can't look at you and assume and explain away your asexuality in some way. So you don't have a disability, you don't have a history of sexual trauma, you don't have anything else that could invalidate your statement about yourself in the eyes of someone trying to judge you. And you've never experienced sexual attraction at all in any way, and you've never had sex. So like a gold star asexual is, I think it's important to note, is it's not about how asexual you are, it's about how confusing other people find your asexuality. Anything that might confuse it. And for me, I think part of the reason why there was a time where I was in the press a lot, like I was in the film Asexual, I was in a lot of news in the US and the UK and elsewhere in the world. Part of it was that I fit that image of a gold star asexual people. Like, I was male. Men are like supposed to be really sexual in society. Women who were coming forward and talking about asexual experiences weren't taken as seriously because there's like this expectation they weren't supposed to be sexual anyway, which is also crazy. But like disabled folks who were coming forward weren't taken as seriously. I was taken more seriously in the US because I'm a white man, and I could get up and say things and like people were more likely to just believe them. So I was taken more seriously because I'm seen as conventionally attractive. So people would look at me and be like, oh, this is someone who could have sex if he wanted to. And he is, a man in his 20s, so he should be wanting to have a lot of sex. So like, if he's saying he's asexual, then that must be true. And so I think that there is I think when we talk about that superiority, there's a kind of a desire to be a kind of asexual that is not confusing to other people. And when I think back to that Haven for Human Amoeba, to the official Asexual Society, that site with all of the with a quiz that everyone to fill out, their real fear was that asexual people would be confusing to other people, and that if we didn't have this gold star standard, if we didn't gatekeep, then the sexual world would question our validity, which they were doing anyway. And we wouldn't be given this space. We wouldn't be given this permission to be the way that we are. Like, there was a real, I think, implicit fear of the judgment that we receive all the time in that desire for that gold star. Like that gold star was like a shield against other people's confusion and other people's judgment, more than anything else. And like, I get the fear. I get why people have that fear and want that shield. But it is so important that we not buy into that. It's so important that we not internalize that and judge one another by how confusing we are to a sexual world that have broken assumptions, and instead like seek to understand one another's experience as intrinsically valid in whatever way our isness shows up, and then challenge the world to understand us who we are rather than challenging ourselves to be understandable to the world.
How wonderful that you say that, David. It's absolutely amazing to hear. Of course, coming from you, it means considerably a lot more to a lot of people. But like you said, being a white person, being a white cis man, might have made it easier for you to be heard. And over the last 7 to 8 years, or whatever work I've done with Indian Asians, actually did make me realize that the way this activism, this movement, this community work needs to be done in Asian context is drastically different from how it is done in the West. Not to say that one is invalid or the other is not good enough, but it's just a different approach that needs to be taken. And which is why I thought of this conference, the PanACEa conference, to be able to highlight the various nuances that happen at the intersection of Asian cultures and asexuality. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I have many thoughts, but I think your thoughts are probably much more qualified and validated than I am, than mine are, because I'm so used to operating in the US context and I think to a limited extent, a UK context. So I would be very curious, sort of based on what I've said, for where you think some of those differences are.
Lovely. Okay. So there are, of course, a series, I think, of differences when it comes to how an asexual person grows up in an Asian culture. And I'll specifically speak from the Indian culture's perspective, because that's what I understand personally. In many ways, I think there is considerably more representation of diversity in general, or acceptance of diversity in general in most Western cultures versus that in India, for sure. It's beyond any doubt for me at this point of time. Beyond that, of course, there is no culture of sex education or talking about these things, because they're considered a little too taboo, a little too stigmatized. And this stigma is disproportionately, it's disproportionately true for women in my culture, in Indian culture. To add to that, we do grow up in a culture which is, of course, patriarchal, and there's which I think is true for Western culture as well, but it's probably a little different still for India and Indian cultures. And most women, and I feel mostly for the women who are asexual more than I feel for other genders, for multiple personal and experiential reasons, but most women just don't grow up with the kind of bodily autonomy that I think women do enjoy in the West. For a young girl in India, the idea that she owns her body, that her body is herself, and for her to decide, make decisions for, is a very alien concept. It's something that I think most women in India will start to realize way later in their late 20s to early 30s, that their body was always their own, and it was theirs to make decisions for. And to, of course, add on to that, it becomes more complex when we start thinking of the concepts of arranged marriages, which are a norm in India. There's nothing unexpected about it. It's pretty much an understood thing that by the age of 25, if you haven't found anybody for yourself, your parents will find you somebody and will get you married to them without ever really necessarily asking you or considering your response if it's a no to that marriage. And then the last, and definitely not the least, the final nail on the head is, I think, the fact that till date, we don't consider legally marital rape as rape in India. And while it's true that this might not be applicable to all asexual people, not even all asexual women, it is true for so many of them that I think my personal activism so far has been driven by this motivation rather than the movement working for the concept of identity. It's so much more for these that I do what I do, and so much lesser for the concept of identity.
I think that makes absolute that makes a great deal of sense, because I think in the context that I've been operating, where there's a presumption that your path into identity is going to, you will have the agency to build relationships around your own identity, in a way that for women in Indian context, like, that is not true much of the time. And the need is to fight for that agency. I think that is very powerfully articulated. And I'm curious also, and part of this we could talk about after the conference. I know we're almost at time, but are there things that we can be doing as ACE activists in the West that better support the activism that you're engaged in, and that you see other ACEs in an Indian context engaged in?
There actually are, and maybe, David, this is a conversation for you and I to have
Yes.
Personally, and I'm happy to have that obviously with you at any point of time. But for now, I just invite you to have any closing statements that you might want to share, since we have just a few minutes left. I do believe there's a lot of questions that were asked, but I do also think that they're beyond the scope of this interaction. I think they're more about how to self-identify and how to figure out your sexuality, which I think I'll urge all of you all to do over the course of this conference, please, because there's so many back and forths that you might have to do to figure out where exactly you stand yourself. But David, your closing statements, please.
It's a real honor to come and be at the PanACEa conference today, and to have seen, I think, having been witness to a part of ACE history, to see how this is growing and evolving into a much deeper conversation about how ACEness shows up and how it can transform our understanding of ourselves, of what it means to be connected, what it means to be human, what it means to build family or not build family, in the many different ways that can happen. And because this has been about history, I would invite those of you at this conference who are exploring this topic to kind of come at it with a sense of a lineage of people who are supporting one another in understanding and expressing ourselves, who are supporting one another in understanding ourselves, so that we can live lives on our own terms, so that we can connect on our own terms, so that we can push back against the judgments that the world puts on us and support one another in doing that, rather than taking those judgments internally. And I hope that this conference can be a site of exploration, kind of a place of reprieve from those judgments, where we can understand how to support one another and understand how to tell stories about our own experience in ways that feel more true.
Incredible, David. Once again, would like to heartily, warmly thank you for your time, especially at this hour of the day. And also thank you for your beautiful words. They bring a lot of comfort to not just me, I'm pretty sure to all the people who are listening right now, and all the people who will listen to this recording at a later date. Once again, thank you from the entire team, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be invited today. And thank you for all of your work, to you and the rest of the team in putting this incredible conference together.
Thank you, David. Thanks.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. The next session will shortly begin, and it will be on AIDS representation in Asian media. So please hang around and we'll be talking. It's going to be an informal discussion. So hang around and we will definitely talk about it. And we'll definitely have I'm excited to have this as part of this conference, and I am so pumped. So let's after a couple of minutes, we'll definitely be back and we'll resume our talk or discussion on AIDS representation in Asian media. Shishir, do you want to test your mic and audio and video?
Hello. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Wait. Let me just switch on my camera.
Awesome.
You want me to keep it on, or should I just stop it for now?
It's up to you. If you want to keep it on, you can keep it on.
All right.
Hina, do you want to check your audio and video?
Yeah, this is my audio. This is my video.
Awesome. Let me do mine. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
I am so excited for this.
Same.
Okay. So we'll start in another minute so that we get our things together and we can then discuss.
All right.
Ouch. Okay, so it's 7:05 already. So let's just then start. Hello all, welcome to everyone who is around here who stayed back after David J's keynote address on history of AVEN before AVEN. So it was a wonderful and insightful keynote address, and it gave us a lot of idea about what it was like to start a group, to start a website, and what kind of research was happening before the start of AVEN. So it was wonderful to know that, and you can check the video, and this is all live streamed, so you can check it out anytime you want to have that insightful details about AVEN before AVEN. So today, this hour is going to be dedicated to ACE representation in Asian media. We all know that all ACEs all around the world, ACEs of Asia, we are all starved for ACE representation in any form of media. So since this is PanACEa and this is a takeover by PanACEa, so we call it as PanACEa takeover. We are going to be discussing about the ACE representation in Asian media. And specifically, we are going to be looking at anime, manga, and some BLGL content. And also, we're going to be looking at fan fiction, and we're going to be looking at what other forms of representation in the Asian media. So this is going to be an informal discussion because it's going to be a little bit insightful about who we are as well, what we like, each of us. And you're going to know more about us through this. So feel free to hop in and join the conversation in the chat box. And we are going to be really looking at the statement, ACE representation is nil in Asian media. Is it really true? Or is there no representation? Or is there little representation? Or is there representation, but it's not coming to the forefront? So we're going to be looking at that through this discussion. And we'll also maybe look into a bit of acing our perspective when we look at stories, when we see media content, right? So that would be the hope. So let's just dive in with our introductions. Hina, do you want to start with your introduction? Go ahead and start.
Hello everyone. I'm Hina. I am a transmedia storyteller, a theater maker, and an educator. I work in gaming currently, and I am asexual. I also identify as panromantic and polyamorous, and I love anime. I mean, love would be a strong word to use, but I'm very, very into anime. It's something that resonates with, the form of entertainment that resonates with me a lot. And I think the early days was when we had Animax, and there was that other channel, but Cartoon Network had some of it when those anime happened, and that was when I had a television, and I lost touch with that as I grew up into adulthood. And Shishir is one of the people who kind of brought anime back to my jindagi, to my life. And I'm going to be talking about a couple of anime. I have their trailers lined up so that everyone gets to see that. Smart, right? I'm smart.
Lovely, lovely. That is amazing. Shishir, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Shishir, and I have just finished my graduation in engineering, and I am now moving on to a course in theater making and acting from DSM. And I, again, was introduced to anime at a very young age. I think Animax was something that even I used to watch a lot. And then over a period of time in, I think, 6th grade, I was given Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood CDs, with like each 20 episode CDs. And that was like my first anime that I actually watched. And the first time that I watched Full Metal Alchemist was without subtitles. And I watched the full thing in Japanese without subtitles. And, that is something that hooked me on to anime. And yeah, looking forward to talking about Full Metal Alchemist and Horimiya today.
Lovely, lovely, lovely to hear you both talk about the love for anime. For me, I'm actually pretty new to anime because it was only this year that I got into it. And I started with Ghibli movies. So I'm a huge Ghibli fan, and I started with Spirited Away, then My Neighbor Totoro, all that. And then I moved on to another anime which AVEN actually recommended, AVEN Forum recommended. So that was my gateway into anime world and manga world. So having done our introductions, right, knowing how we got into it. So let's talk a bit about our own queer identities, right? So that how we look at it, how when we are queer, when we identify as queer, how do we then look at the content that is being presented to us, right? So let's get into that a bit. Hina, do you want to take it up?
You know me and talking, man. You're inviting me to talk, I shall. Okay, so I know that this is not an uncommon story, but for when it was happening to me, it felt very unique. I didn't feel I was queer growing up. Yes, Pragati. I didn't feel I was queer growing up. I thought I was part of the crowd. I thought I was a cis het woman. The delusions of youth, I tell you. It took me a really long time to figure out that there are things that I feel and I resonate with and I am that are not what I thought it is, right? So I think the judgment that came out when the second time in 2016, on the 6th of September 2016, when they finally took 377 off the table, I think it was a few months before that that I believed I was bisexual, right? And I have been, of course, working in the queer space and working with queer youth and creating queer theater for years by then, right? But I still believed I was straight, and I was like, you know what, they won't give us funding because it's a straight-led organization. I used to say that about my own stuff, right? Anyone who knows me, like Shishir knows me, he's laughing right now. Anyone who knows me right now will laugh, but that's how it was. So I thought I was bi then. And then it was only last year, I'm 35 years old, so last year when I turned 34, like literally in August, I kind of started reading up because the lockdown does those things to you. And I knew about asexuality. I had worked with people, not with a person, not people, with a young person in the city in Pune who identified as asexual. And I knew what it meant, and I knew what it was, and I knew that it was a queer identity, but I never looked at any labels, right? Like even within the queer space, you're mostly surrounded by gay men. So, you know, you are aware of their culture. You're aware of that culture. Not their culture, it's our culture. But every other letter in that alphabet soup doesn't really appear in your this, especially like in India, in the Asian context, right? And I don't know. I think, and I was just reading some fan fiction, some Avatar fan fiction right now, where there was a asexual Zuko, and how and the moment that was described was someone mentions the word asexual, And Zuko, who's never heard the word before, suddenly feels like this makes sense. And you don't want to believe that as like a writer, as a storyteller. I don't want to believe that because that seems like a weak plot point. You can't just hear a word and resonate, but that's literally what happened to me, right? Like I knew the word, it was in the periphery, but somehow I don't know, I don't even remember what was that moment, but I know that I read something and it just made sense, right? It made sense to this, you know, like I think in the morning also when we were with Rebecca, afternoon with Rebecca and Alia, the play had this thing of that aces are described as animal-like or robot-like. And, you know, I also have neurodivergence things and ADHD and a lot of other shiz going on. I will not abuse on this call. Shiz going on. And suddenly all of it just came together. The whole dissatisfaction, almost just this, I don't even know, it's not even an itch. It's just this sheer discomfort. Like right now I feel a discomfort because we've all been sitting, and I'm a writer, so I sit at my laptop 10, 12 hours a day, which most of us are doing now, but I've been doing it longer, just for the record. And your back hurts, right? And it's that kind of discomfort that never goes away when you're watching media, especially. Like I remember going into theaters and crying because I just couldn't understand why this is what it is, right? And I'm legendary for crying in the movie theater, which is ridiculous. Like my mother was to sit 2 seats away from me, right? And I don't even cry at the emotional parts. I cry because I'm like, how is this like for them? How is this? Because in my head it's real, right? Okay. And there was this entire period that I went through where I stopped watching movies, and even now my intake of Sneha, you should feel comfortable to tell me to shut up whenever, you know, I've ranted on for too long. So I'm very careful about the media I take in because it's very emotionally impactful for me. Wrap up in 30 seconds. Okay. And so, and when I'll talk about Yuri on Ice, I'll tell you how I got into manga and how that kind of broke something in me. And yeah, we'll talk about that. So see, I wrapped up now.
Thank you, Hina.
Neha gives me cookies every time I obey her.
Oh my goodness. Shishir, you go ahead.
I think I kind of agree with Hina where, you know, you kind of read up on something and then suddenly you relate to it. That is what I think happened with me as well. I was reading up on different types of sexualities and I read up demisexuality. And I'm like, shit, full relation with that particular word. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I am. I mean, these are just labels, right? At the end of the day, like you need to relate with whatever you are and you want to be. So yeah, I think that is something that is there. And again, there is very poor representation of the community as a whole in general in any kind of media. And even when there is some kind of representation, it isn't like genuine representation. It's just that we want to add in stuff. That is why we are putting it, and it's not authentic. I think that is where you know, the media is going wrong, and I think we should work towards changing that.
Lovely, lovely, lovely thought. Actually, for me, my queer identity kind of drove me to find queer representation in media. So I was literally looking for, searching for ACE content anywhere and everywhere. So when that led me to AVEN forum, and they were talking about ACE representation at length. And there was this one random comment saying that there is ACE representation here in this particular manga and this particular anime. And I would just hop onto that and I would start watching. So before that, I had been watching LGBTQIA plus content, and every one of them would end up in either, like, the main character would either end up dead or they would end up in a very sadder or tragic state. And I hated it. I was like, I want some, you know, positive aspirational content. And I was on the lookout for that. And that's how I came to AVEN and started looking for ace representation, or even queer content for that matter, the non-normative content. That's how I see it, as normative and non-normative content. And I, for a year now, I've been watching only non-normative content, and I see a change. Like the way I think now, the way I see stories is from a ace perspective or aro ace perspective, and probably queer perspective. And I see characters having these vibes. And if somebody, and I'm actually following the accounts that give these instances or incidents, or where there is some ace, aro, or queer vibes happening, without them actually telling that this character is ace, or this character is aro, or this character is queer. So for me, that was how I sort of muddled my way into the Asian media content. And that would probably, I mean, I would call it muddling through, yeah. So,
if I could just add, Sneha, like I think the way queer representation without the use of labels, because the labels originate elsewhere in different culture, the way queer representation has evolved within Asian culture, it's in Asian media, I think it's far more nuanced and it's far faster than it ever happened in the West. And the West still gets a lot of shit really wrong. But like a lot of stuff that originates in Asia at least stays true to its context. I'm not saying it becomes suddenly welcoming for all of us, but it stays true to context. It's not rubbish. Just putting that out there.
Okay, that we will get into that point, true to its context, in a while, because I want to know your favorite. Like, I want you to go in detail about your favorite manga or your favorite anime. Go ahead and take it away.
So I keep saying this, I don't have favorites. But there are two that I very emotionally resonate with, and I'm going to show you the trailer of it. It's a 1-minute trailer, so I can share screen and do that. Hopefully I'll get it right and you won't end up seeing something, that you shouldn't. Wait, oh God, again, how does this happen? Okay. Share. Okay, y'all can see it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the opening.
Yes.
Opening of Yuri on Ice. And I will tell you the story of how I came to this. But this opening, the minute it starts with that purple patch that'll come on now, and the way the music starts, it had me hooked at that point. In a subject that I'm not even interested in. Just saying. You hear it? How do what do I have to do?
When you share, right? When you share screen, at the below, you'll have optimize audio. Optimize audio and video. So you'll have to optimize that.
What?
Otherwise, I'll share. Wait.
Okay, I can send you the link.
Yeah, send me the link. I'll share.
How do now I've forgotten how to share the link. That is the link.
One minute. Share screen. Google Chrome. Share sound. Optimize video for clip. And share. Can you all see my?
Yeah.
You can see
yeah,
it.
it's visible now.
Okay.
So, and this is the thing about anime, right? So, do you know how they animated these figure skating?
Nope.
They had Olympic level figure skate, and shot them and converted that to art.
Ooh. Yeah.
Like not converted as in made it a cartoon, but they
Yeah.
use that as the reference for their art. Each move for figure skating, this entire thing is based on figure skating, was made because someone did the routine live and they recreated that in anime.
Wow, that is intense.
Okay. Yeah, that is intense. And this was created by 2 women. Okay. And as I mean, I don't know if you could make out, but it is pretty much within the yaoi BL space. And Yuri on Ice was recommended to me by someone who. So I was working in a space and running a space, and there was someone else who was a colleague there, much younger than me. Don't judge me. Who I knew I had feelings for, but I hadn't reached that space where I was allowed to admit that even to myself, where I allowed myself to admit that. So you're in this foggy, and this is a very, from what I understand, is a very arrow A space also, where there's this thingy, because it's not romance, it's not sexual. There is a thingy, right? It's officially called a thingy that you are feeling. And this thingy is kind of driving you a little nuts because you're feeling it and it's intense. Yes, trademark Mridula. And but it's not as clear. Like, I believe that when allo people feel the thingy, they know what to do next. They have a roadmap, right? For people like me, this thingy is a frustration because this thingy is like, why are you existing? I was doing fine without you in my life, right? And while experiencing the thingy and being unable to accept that one is experiencing the thingy, this person who I'm having said thingy for recommends Yuri on Ice to me, right? And by this time, I'm in a phase where I have kind of shut out a lot. I've been going to therapy for a year. I have shut out a lot of things. Like that's also like a neurodivergent thing. You box things up and then you're only dealing with one box and then the other boxes don't exist. Like literally, you forget they exist. And in this space, I started watching this. And I literally, like, what I'm feeling in my heart right now is what I felt then. This sudden, like, this thingy, right? This, it's just, yeah, I don't even know how to describe it. And I'm supposed to be a writer who uses words, right? It's just this feeling that's in your heart because you know you're going to watch something that you know from the get-go that this is something that is closer to your heart than anything else you've ever watched, right? And I remember watching this anime. It's an 11-episode anime, okay? And just breaking down, not like crying or emotionally, just I felt like a part of me has shattered because everything that I thought I had held together suddenly seemed out there and loose. I suddenly realized that this thingy meant I had feelings for this person, and not in the romantic sexual way, but at that time I didn't know that I was asexual. I didn't accept that label. I wasn't looking into it. So for me, this was going to be another one of those places where I have thingies for people don't thingy back to me. And that's essentially, that's the ace life, right? You are basically ghosted by people who you enjoy spending time with because they don't sense the sexual vibe from you. It's something I learned only like this year, by the way, just say. But it was happening then, and it was far more hurtful then, because you didn't know why it was happening. And I think I'm an amazing person, so why isn't it happening? And after watching this anime, I couldn't go back into the box anymore. I just couldn't. I remember going to my therapist and bawling to them about this and saying, why is this anime? Why am I so, can I say? No. Why am I so messed up by this anime? Right? It's just the story of this guy who loses a medal while figure skating, but then his idol comes to teach him how to figure skate, and then he goes on to do things with figure skating, and then they fall in love, and then they like they buy rings for each other. There isn't a single kiss in this. I mean, there is a kiss which is masked by his arm, and a lot of queer people got very pissed about that because they thought it was queer baiting. And I'm like, it's not queer baiting. They're clearly in love. And then there is a third person who's there who seems to be the aromantic aspect of this, because it doesn't relate to the kookiness that these two bring with their romance in it, but is also wants to be part of them, right? And this is all happening while they figure skate, right? And it's just, I don't know, I didn't have labels then. I didn't have an understanding of myself. I still am, that understanding is still evolving. But this anime cracked me open, and I don't think any other form of media has ever done that, right? And on its face, other than the, you know, the great technicalities of the art, you're going to give me a 30-second warning again, aren't you, Sneha? Yeah. Other than the technicalities of the art, it's actually a pretty simple story, right? But it blew my mind with how much I wanted to watch it, and I wanted to appreciate each moment of it. So yeah, 30 seconds are up.
Thank you, Hina. That was a lovely recommendation, and I loved the Yuri on Ice trailer. I was moving with it, the music and the visuals. I was just into it. So thank you for that recommendation. Shishir, what is your favorite, and why is that your favorite?
So as I was talking about it in the introduction part of the section, Full Metal Alchemist is something that I watched. That was my first anime, and it has stayed with me all this while. I've watched it at least 7 to 8 times now, and every time there is this feelings and all of that come out when you're watching it. There's so much happening, and it's just one of the really well written and well animated animes of that time. And again, when I was watching these animes, I wasn't actually looking at the representation that is happening, or whatever the author wanted to show. As in, there is no clear indication in this anime as such. But if you look at Len Yao and Greed, these are two characters. Len Yao is like a prince from another country, and Greed is an homunculi. And the way they bond throughout the anime, and at the end, where I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but in the end, when they come to a conclusion, it is something that is, you don't expect it to happen throughout the anime, and then it just happens. So that is something that it's something to look forward to. And again, Edward Elric, the lead of the show, one of the leads of the show, is again reminds me, or gives me demisexual vibes as well, because throughout the anime, you don't really see him looking at love or something. He's really good at what he does, but he's not actively looking for love or love interest and such. And he doesn't really realize that he likes someone till the time someone else tells him that you have feelings for that person, and that's when he realizes, oh, this is also something that can happen. And yeah, it is one of my favorite animes, and I give it 2 thumbs up and recommend you all to watch it if you haven't already.
Also written by a woman.
Yes.
Thank you, Shishir, for that recommendation. We'll definitely add it to our list to watch, like to be watched. I shall be adding it definitely. So my favorite still is Saiki K. Oh God, where do I even start? Because if I start, like the mention of Psyche K just gives me happiness, because the Aero-Ace vibes is so strong. Not just Aero-Ace vibes, but also the agender vibe is like, oh my goodness, how did I not see this? How did I not even know about this anime? Was my first reaction. And till date, like I watched this anime, I think in August or July, and I have been rewatching it ever since. I had watched it in one go, and I've been rewatching it, and it is my comfort anime. That is, before I go to sleep, I watch it because it gives me comfort, it makes me relaxed, and makes me feel, there is someone like me that is on screen who is Aero, Ace and Agenta. I'm like, yes, thank you for making that anime, for writing that anime. Of course, if you look at the format of the show, it's kind of all over the place and it's kind of silly. But then, oh my God, the way Psyche K thinks, the way, like for instance, my complete vibe with Psyche K was when he goes to this mart to buy coffee jelly, and he sees he sees these deals, and he's looking at each and every deal. There are 3 deals, and he's handling it. He's looking at each and every aspect of like the grams of weight, the money, the price tag, and he's calculating, if I have this much money for the entire month. If I spend everything, how many would I have? The exact same process, right? Thought process goes in my head whenever I go to a mart. And that moment, I just fell in love with the show. I didn't even care about the silliness of the show. I was like, no, don't care. Never mind. This is me. This is how I think. This is how I feel. And also, when you look at Psyche K's viewpoint, right? He looks at people as people and animals as just flesh. Like animals and people are both same, like flesh and bones. And it's just the structure is different. And when I saw that, the way he sees it, I'm like, oh my God, this is something totally my thing. It's like I can relate to it so hard. I can vibe for it so hard. It's like, how did I not see this before? If I had seen this before, I might if I had seen it. So that was my thought then. So that would be, and Psyche K is on Netflix. You just have to go search it on Netflix. It's there. And his view on romance, his view on crush culture, his view on the entire, like how he values friendship more, even though it irritates him, it vexes him to be friends with people. And his catchphrase is yare yare. I have owned it now. Every time somebody, like in my family, like, what is this yare yare? I know are re, but what is this yare yare that you keep saying it? So I've owned it now, and I cannot seem to get enough of Psyche K. So that is my recommendation. Like, double up. If you're Aero Ace, go for it. Or if you even fall in the agender, pangender category, go ahead, watch it.
Just get your hair pink. Your hair is also like that, and you just need the antenna.
Antenna, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I just love the whole idea about knowing somebody's thoughts, because I suck at, I do not get nonverbal cues. So for me, oh, you have that, can I have that? It is aspirational for me. So that was something I aspire to have. And I think, yeah. So moving on, let's go to the second recommendation. Hina, go for the second one.
Oh God, now it's going to get intense. So I have what? Okay, tell me how to do this. I will show the video. I can't hear you, Sneha. You're on mute.
So when you share screen, you get a text box, right? So underneath the text box,
And then you optimize for video clip. Ha!
Yeah, and then share
Correct.
audio. Yeah, click both, and then share.
Yes. And now I'm sharing, and now I'm here.
犯罪係数340執行モードリーサルエリミネーター慎重に照準を定め対象を排除してください執行官の菅生哲平さんですね下月八坂泉を送還
妻に強く生きろと伝えてくれ
今回は私の事件ってことで
なぜこんな犯罪に手を貸すんだお前の方こそなぜ正義を振りかざす
特別行政区サンクチュアリ彼らはこの施設の管理者たちに洗脳されているからです
行方不明の国防軍兵士大友樹大友は立派に死んだ国のためにフットスタンプ作戦本当は一体何があったんですか 俺は復讐なんて命を懸けるほどの価値はないと思ってる。
鴻上は日本で復讐をしたのね。ここで引き下がったら公安局刑事課のエース下月美香の名が廃る。
これが大友さんの宝剣か。ただのうちから幸せになりますように。だが一度撃てばもう二度と人を殺す前の自分には戻れない。
犯罪係数340。
Stop share. Hi, did you catch that? Or did I just enjoy it all on my own?
We
No,
got that.
we saw it.
I don't know if I got the dialogue where she says I'm letting go of my title of as PSB's ace. Okay. So just little quick background. This anime is set in the year 2115. So like 195 years from now. And it was originally made, the trailer that you all saw came out later, but the original series came out in 2013. And they predicted that the world went to, the shiz in the year 2020, just saying. And it's essentially a world like this, what is it? What was, shoot, I knew this word.
Dystopian.
Dystopian technocracy. Japan has become a technocracy which is run by an AI, and they have the capacity to measure your ability to do bad, which is your crime coefficient, right? And if your crime coefficient exceeds a certain amount, you are taken away from society. And if you have the inclination, the talents, you become something like a police officer, an enforcer. But you have to be under the control of those who still have a good crime coefficient. And then if it goes above a certain level more, you're basically eliminated by the system, right? So that awesome gun you saw, it's called a Dominator, right? It's called a Dominator, and it is the one that measures the crime coefficient and kills you or paralyzes you or whatever. And essentially it's basically procedural drama. Okay, how many people here have seen Criminal Minds? Raise your hands in chat. You haven't? Shishir hasn't seen Criminal Minds. Oh, okay, no one else has, only Sneha has. Okay, anywho, so it's basically procedural drama, Criminal Minds set in Japan 100 years from now. Okay, where they basically use forensic technology and criminal psychology to solve crimes. And of course, there is that whole tussle of good versus evil and what good and evil actually means. And all of that is fine. And the episodes center around this Division 1. So in Japan, Division 1 of, this is a fact. Division 1 of the police gets all the serious crimes, right? So they'll get the murders, they'll get the serial killings, they'll get the high profile kidnappings or rape cases and stuff like that. And everything else, like they have 1 to 9, and the seriousness of the crime reduces. And organized crime doesn't come under Division 1. And so this is about Division 1 in Japan in 2115, and that's where it starts. So the creators of the serials of this anime had consciously decided that they would stay away from moe. Moe basically means soft feelings or romantic feelings in anime, and so their decision was to stay away from moe. Although there is a background Yuri relationship, and there is some people interpret it as a romantic, a heteromantic, or a polyromantic situation going on in the series. But there's no real, I get 1 minute. But there's no real, okay, so I'll just tell you why I vibe with this, because Sneha is taking my time away from me. Essentially, there is a character in here called Ginoza Nobuchika, who is, they call him 1000% virgin in the series. So he's canon 1000% virgin, but most people interpret it as that he's an Arrow Ace character. And that's how most fan fiction is written about him. And I'll get into fan fiction later when Sneha gives me time or gives me a cookie. But yes, that is it. Psychopaths, please go watch it. It is something we need to talk about. And we need to write more fan fiction for Dinoza, just saying.
Thank you, Hina.
Also, Sneha is mean.
In the interest of time, we have to get more to be done. So Shishir, go ahead, give us your second favorite and why.
All right. So my second favorite is Horimiya, and it is, oh man, it's just too much emotion and too much fun stuff involved, and it's a lot of fun to read and watch as well. So Horimiya originally started as like a panel comic, which wasn't technically manga, and it was then adapted into manga by Hero. And I first started reading Horimiya a long time back, and I've continued reading it till March 21, which it ended in March 21, and I've been reading all the continuous updates, and it was a roller coaster ride when it ended, and I was like, oh no, now what am I gonna now what am I gonna go back to? And yeah, and the characters in Horimiya also, like, again, they aren't like canon, but Toru and Yuki is something that I feel have an Ero relationship where, they kind of like each other, but they never really feel to, get into a relationship zone and always end up staying friends. And that is something that, is bending towards the ace side. And Honoka Sawada is also one such character who, loses her brother and looks at uh, Izumi Miyamura, who is the lead, as a brotherly figure. And that is also something that is, something that represents a different side of this. And again, Honoka Sawada also likes Kyoko Hori, who is also, like, Kyoko Hori and Izumi Miyamura are dating, and Sawada has relationships with both of them. And for Sawada, Kyoko Hori is like a love interest, whereas for Miyamura is like this brotherly figure for her, which she looks up to and, opens up to later on. So yeah, this is also one really good read as well as a watch. And I still haven't watched the anime because I don't want to. I don't want to go through all of that again. But yeah, I would really recommend this one as well. Full Metal Alchemist and Horimiya have been in my top list and will always stay in my top list. They are not going to change. So yeah, again, 2 thumbs up for this one as well.
Can I add one point to Horimiya since I've seen the anime?
Yeah.
The central character Izumi Miyamura also comes across as very ace, because first they kind of come across having a very void punk kind of aesthetic, where they don't want to belong, but they don't know why they don't want to belong. And there is always this sense of the sexual the representation of the sexual act usually comes when Miyamura is not trying to, but there is this thread of him doing it for Hori, right? Not in a bad way, not in a sense of being coerced, but it is something that it seems like that wouldn't occur to them to do on their own, but they realize that this is what their partner wants, and it's something that they mutually agree to doing. So there's that massive sense in Horimiya. And I think, and it's not just Horimiya, it's a lot of what they call shoujo manga and anime in Japan, that there is this sense of there's actually more conversation around consent, and there's more conversation around why we need to have sex and what sex is than in anything else. So, and this is targeted at teenage girls, just saying.
Wow, thank you for the input, Hina. And thank you for the recommendation, Shashir. Horimiya, good one. I'll definitely add it to my watch list now that you both have recommended it so strongly. So my second favorite is Bloom Into You. It's for me, it's I see it as an underrated manga and anime because it comes under the Yuri manga. So when I started, it is also a recommendation by AVEN. So when I started reading it, it was a bit slow because I like fast-paced things, and it is about two young women in high school trying to figure out whether they like each other or not. And you have an Aero character thrown in, who represents us and how we see the world of romance and allosexuals, and how like for instance, my why I like this is because it explores female friendships and female relationships. And also when it comes to the Eroes character talking to the main character, the way both of them vibe. So there is this a level of vibing that goes on between them. So you get the hint that the main character herself is somewhere on the Ero spectrum or A spectrum, maybe demi-romantic, demisexual, could be, or gray romantic, gray sexual. So because she identifies with what the Eroes character says to a large extent, and the Eroes character also thinks, the Eroes character is called Meiji, and the way he looks at relationships and the way he looks at love, or it's like he's standing, it's like for him, everybody is performing and he's just watching. So he's like an observant and a spectator, a passive spectator looking at the world, go around in circles, go around trees, doing things in love and in for the sake of romance. So that perspective was very, I vibed with that perspective of Meiji. And for me, that was why I always would want to watch it or rewatch it. And I've read both the manga and the I've seen the anime as well. The anime is kind of incomplete. It's so I had to go read up the manga because I wanted to know what exactly happened afterwards. And it's beautiful. It's beautifully written, and that's my second recommendation. So with that, we have completed our favorites, and let us moving on to fan fiction. Tina, I'll give you 2 minutes to talk about fan fiction because then I'll have to talk about BL and GL and then we end. You're on mute.
Why don't you talk about BL and GL first?
Fine.
Since we're already at Bloom Into You, so kind of go.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So recently, like in the past 3-4 years, there is this extreme, I would say it's a spike in the Southeast Asian and East Asian BLGL drama. And in the COVID times, the spike just increased. Like every country is putting out BLGL content. And usually they follow the trend of yaoi format. So it's always two men or two male presenting characters. They are like at odds at each other, and then they fall in love, and then it's that fluff content. And so when you watch a serious LGBT content, LGBTQ plus content, and then you want something to offset, you watch BLGL. So that's how I see it as, because everything is so, some of the content in LGBTQIA plus is so serious, and I have wept for days because of the content I've seen, the serious content I've seen. And I had to literally, like, in the next few minutes, I have to watch something fluff to make me feel all right. Okay, there is some hope in the world. There is some aspirational aspect that can be watched on screen. So most of the BLGLs are written by women, cishet women, and queer people. So there is a lot of concepts like consent, and there is you see the entire breakdown of heteronormative system, but it still stays in the heteronormative system. So it's kind of like, it's an oxymoronic statement to make. Yes, I agree, but there are, like, to an extent it breaks down the normative system. And to an extent, it embraces it as well. So for instance, in BL, there is this entire concept of husband, wifey. They say, I don't get it. Two men, why do you want to call each other husband, wife? Call each other husbands. What is the big deal? So there are those heteronormative aspects there. But it's a good watch. And some of them do have ace and aro vibes. At least in the form of like demisexuality. So there was this one series that I usually, what happens is I do not follow it weekly. I'll just wait for the reviews to come in and then watch. But then there was this one recommendation saying that there are demi vibes in this particular series. So I just went and watched that. I started following it, and it hit me like, I have never seen BL and GL from the ace vibe, because Yaoi is so steeped into the LGBT, the allosexual culture. So when that recommendation came about, I was quite taken aback. Oh my goodness, I've never had this ace perspective on BL, GL, and now I should have that perspective. So that was my turning point for me to see the ace perspective in almost in the most allosexual content, which is the BL. So after that, I kept I returned back to the old shows and started watching it from the ace perspective. So Hina, you go with fan fiction.
Do we have time, or should we just close?
You have 2 minutes. So
2 minutes. So basically, all I'll say about fan fiction is that it's I again haven't, I discovered it very recently. I didn't know archive of our own existed. And I think fan fiction is a much bigger and much more precious, because I write fan fiction conversation for me. So I'm not going to rush into it. Shreya has a very interesting point, which I think we should get into. But the idea is that there is a universe created, and then we get to play in it. And I think that is the most wonderful thing. And I don't particularly see content, whether it's anime or whatever, as, for me, queer is an umbrella, and everything that is non-normative falls under the queer space, and it just resonates more with me than anything heteronormative does. And I think fan fiction does that far more often and far more voraciously. And again, it's essentially a place run by young women and queer people, right? So that's why I feel like, although I'm much older than most of the creators, but still, yes.
Wow. Okay, lovely. So now that we've kind of covered our favorites, so let's just then end the session by saying that, yes, there is to an extent the poor representation, but there is representation, and there is more hope, because we do see that many people are looking for ace representation, and there is some hope that there will be increasing representation. Even I think I'm more hopeful than most. I think I'm a little bit on the optimistic side. And I think maybe we can also see it from the ace or aro ace perspective. Like, look at the relationships, look at the friendships that are being showcased on screen, and see if there is certain level of aceness to it or aro-ness to it. And maybe we then see it from the acing, the perspective kind, the ace eye, and we might be able to get more out of it, and maybe write few more like Hina is doing, and write it ourselves, right? So why not? So that ends the first day of the conference, and we are really, really happy. We are stoked that at the end of the day we get to talk about our favorite things. Tomorrow we start at 11:30. Our first session of the day is on intersection of queer identities with socio-cultural identities and realities. So please do join. We'll be talking about religion, race, caste, class, ethnicity, how they intersect with our identity, with our queerness, with our aceness, with our aro-aceness, however you want to call it. Yes, with queerness. Yeah. So please do join. It's going to be an insightful session, insightful discussion going on. Thank you all. See you tomorrow and have a great night. Bye.
I just want to add one thing before we leave. So
Yes,
while you were talking about, BLGL, suddenly this anime popped up in my brain, which again I will highly recommend. It's Banana Fish.
No! Go home, Shishir, go home. No, don't listen to him, guys.
Why?
Because I cried.
Okay, yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean,
I steered
it
clear of
comes
it
out
because of
if
the
you,
end.
yeah. But yeah, that is also something that, gives a
Also
good.
created by a woman.
Lovely. So Banana Fish is the last recommendation from Sishir. And with that, we close. Bye. Have a happy Ace week.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.